Table for one? On an anniversary? The words sliced through the ambient murmur of crystal glasses and expensive laughter. Every head at the nearby tables turned, eyes settling on the elderly man standing alone at the hostess podium. His weathered hands gripped a small velvet box, knuckles whitening, as the young waiter's voice carried across the restaurant's panoramic space. The $500 per plate rooftop establishment didn't typically cater to solitary diners, especially ones in decades-old suits. In the corner booth, partially obscured by ambient lighting, Keanu Reeves lowered his menu, eyes narrowing at the exchange. The 21 Sky Lounge occupied the penthouse floor of Manhattan's newest architectural marvel, a temple to excess where celebrities and Wall Street elites gathered nightly. Floor-to-ceiling windows captured the sunset painting the city gold, a backdrop for Instagram moments and business deals. The elderly man, Henry Calloway, stood out like a wrinkled page in a glossy magazine. His reservation had been made months in advance, the hostess's tablet showing a single name with a special request. Window table, west side, sunset view, 42nd wedding anniversary. The waiter's smirk widened as he gestured dramatically toward a tiny table near the kitchen entrance. "Perhaps sir would be more comfortable at one of our sister establishments downtown," the waiter suggested, voice dripping with manufactured concern. Whispers rippled through nearby tables. Someone's camera flash went off. Henry's shoulders curved inward, his dignity wilting under the spotlight of collective judgment. He clutched the small velvet box containing his late wife's restored wedding ring like a talisman. What should have been a sacred tribute was transforming into public humiliation. That's when a chair scraped back from the corner booth, and Keanu Reeves rose to his feet, his expression a mixture of controlled anger and determined compassion that would soon change everything. The quiet dignity in Henry Calloway's posture told a story few in the glittering restaurant could comprehend. Beneath the dated suit beat the heart of a man who had spent 42 years waking up beside Elizabeth Calloway, a public school teacher whose laughter could fill rooms and whose absence had left a void no amount of time could fill. 3 years ago, cancer had claimed her, but their anniversary remained sacred. Each year since her passing, Henry visited a place she'd always wanted to experience but never had the chance. The 21 Sky had been on Elizabeth's wish list since seeing it featured in her favorite magazine. "Someday," she'd said, cutting the article out and placing it in her dream box. That someday had never come for her. The velvet box in Henry's hand contained Elizabeth's wedding ring, recently resized and polished after being damaged in a household accident last year. Tonight's ritual would have been perfect, a sunset toast with her restored ring catching the same golden light that had filtered through the church windows on their wedding day. Instead, he stood frozen under the collective gaze of people whose dinner bills exceeded his monthly pension, their expressions ranging from amusement to second-hand embarrassment. The waiter, Bradley, whose name tag gleamed almost as brightly as his artificially whitened teeth, was clearly enjoying his moment of power. "I have a reservation," Henry said, his voice carrying the soft cadence of a generation that believed in speaking only when necessary. "Calloway, table for one." He straightened his spine, a remnant of military bearing from years long past. The hostess, barely visible behind her digital podium, tapped manicured nails against the screen, a flicker of empathy crossing her features before Bradley intercepted. "Of course you do," Bradley responded, gesturing toward the service entrance. "Right this way. We can set you up, somewhere suitable." The implication hung in the air, somewhere out of sight. From across the restaurant, Keanu Reeves observed the interaction with growing intensity. Dressed in a simple black suit, he'd come to 21 Sky seeking a quiet meal away from the usual fanfare that followed him. Instead, he found himself witness to the quiet cruelty playing out at the entrance. Unlike the other patrons, some now filming discreetly on their phones, others whispering behind menus, Keanu recognized something in Henry's stance. The actor set down his water glass, eyes never leaving the scene. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her companion, voice deliberately audible. They really should have a minimum party size requirement. It's just depressing. Her companion nodded, adding, and a dress code, with a dismissive glance at Henry's well-worn but impeccably clean suit. Bradley was now leading Henry toward a small service table wedged between the swinging kitchen doors and the wait station, a spot typically reserved for staff meals or overflow kitchen prep. The velvet box trembled slightly in Henry's hand as he followed, shoulders squared, despite the humiliation burning across his face. Several diners had their phones up now, the scene apparently worthy of social media documentation. The casual cruelty of the moment crystallized in their smirks and amused glances. "Perhaps sir would prefer to face the wall," Bradley suggested with mock solicitousness, pulling out the chair. The kitchen traffic might be distracting otherwise. A few audible chuckles rippled through the nearby tables. Henry stood still, conflict evident in his weathered features. Pride urged him to leave, to escape the stage his private memorial had become, yet something deeper. Perhaps the promise made to Elizabeth that he would finally see the sunset from this very building kept his feet planted. He had survived war, grief, and loneliness. Surely he could endure this. Keanu Reeves rose from his corner booth, movement deliberate and unhurried. His presence, though not yet fully registered by the restaurant patrons, focused on Henry's humiliation, carried the quiet gravity that had made him beloved both on and off screen. Unlike his action movie characters, there was no dramatic intensity to his approach, just purposeful steps and an expression of calm determination that suggested the evening was about to take an unexpected turn. The soft tap of expensive Italian leather against marble flooring drew attention away from Henry's humiliation. Heads turned as Keanu Reeves approached, his presence creating the peculiar hush that accompanies celebrity sightings, a mixture of recognition, excitement, and the collective holding of breath. Bradley, still standing beside the service table with an expression of manufactured patience, failed to notice the shift in the room's atmosphere until Keanu was merely steps away. The waiter's face transformed as recognition dawned, professional smile automatically engaging, shoulders straightening in preparation to accommodate someone worthy of the restaurant's prime real estate. "Mr. Reeves, what an unexpected pleasure," Bradley gushed, abandoning Henry mid-seat. "Is there something I can help you with? Perhaps your table isn't to your satisfaction?" Keanu's gaze never left Henry, whose weathered eyes now registered a flicker of recognition. The actor moved with the same deliberate calm that characterized his public persona, no flashiness, no obvious awareness of his own status in the room. The velvet box in Henry's hand caught Keanu's attention briefly before he addressed the elderly man directly, bypassing Bradley entirely. "Sir," Keanu said, voice carrying just enough to be heard by the nearest tables but not pitched for show, "I couldn't help but notice you're here for an anniversary." Henry's chin lifted slightly. 42 years today," he replied, voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. Bradley shifted uncomfortably, caught between the elderly nobody and the Hollywood somebody, social calculation visibly working behind his eyes. Several phones were now openly recording, their owners no longer pretending to be engaged in their own conversations. The restaurant manager materialized from nowhere, hovering at the periphery of the scene, clearly monitoring for any situation that might require damage control. "I overheard about your reservation by the window," Keanu continued, then gestured toward his own corner booth, arguably the best seat in the house, with panoramic views of the sunset and the city skyline. "Would you consider joining me? I'm afraid I can't stand eating alone in places like this. Too many eyes." Bradley's expression collapsed into confusion. The social hierarchy he understood suddenly scrambled by Keanu's invitation. "But, Mr. Reeves, we could certainly arrange a larger table if you—" "I think the booth will be perfect for two," Keanu interrupted gently but firmly, without even acknowledging the waiter directly. His focus remained on Henry, whose expression had softened into something between disbelief and gratitude. The actor extended his hand, not in the perfunctory way of business greetings, but with genuine warmth. "I'm Keanu." "Henry Calloway," the older man replied, accepting the handshake. His grip was firm despite his age, the handshake of a man who had built things with those hands. "You really don't have to do this, son." "I know," Keanu said simply. Then, with the hint of a smile, "That's what makes it worth doing." The restaurant had fallen into a mesmerized silence, broken only by the ambient music and the distant clink of kitchenware. The manager stepped forward, suddenly all smiles and accommodation, where moments before there had been only dismissal for Henry. "Gentlemen, please allow me to escort you personally," he offered, shooting a pointed look at Bradley that promised later consequences. As Henry and Keanu followed the manager back to the corner booth, the restaurant's atmosphere transformed. Phones tracked their movement, capturing the unlikely pair, the elderly man in his dated suit clutching a velvet box, and the Hollywood star guiding him with a light hand at his elbow when they navigated between tables. The whispers changed tenor, from mockery to something resembling reverence. "Did you see that? Is that Keanu Reeves? Who's the old guy?" "I heard it's his anniversary." "Alone? That's so sad. But Keanu just—" "Of course he did. It's Keanu." At the booth, Keanu gestured for Henry to take the side facing the sunset, the western view that Elizabeth had dreamed of seeing. The velvet box found its place on the table between them, a silent third presence. Bradley had been replaced by the restaurant's senior server, a woman whose practiced professionalism didn't quite mask her curiosity about the unlikely dining companions. "Would you gentlemen care for something to drink?" she asked, handing them each a leather-bound menu. Henry hesitated, clearly intimidated by a wine list where bottles cost more than his monthly pension. Keanu sensed his discomfort and intervened smoothly. "I understand we're celebrating an anniversary today," he said. "Perhaps you could recommend your finest champagne?" Then, turning to Henry with genuine interest, "Unless you and your wife had a favorite drink?" Henry's eyes brightened. "Elizabeth loved a good whiskey sour, said it reminded her of our first date at the Officers' Club in '72. "2 whiskey sours then," Keanu told the server, "and perhaps the chef could prepare something special for Mr. Calloway's anniversary dinner?" As the server departed, conversation at nearby tables gradually resumed, though many eyes still stole glances at the corner booth. The entire restaurant had been recalibrated by the simple act of kindness. Those who had been filming Henry's humiliation now seemed embarrassed by their participation, phones discreetly lowered. Others who had laughed along with Bradley's cruelty suddenly found their expensive meals less satisfying. Henry ran a weathered finger along the edge of the velvet box. 42 years, he said quietly. Most of it good, some of it hard. None of it I'd trade back. "Tell me about her," Keanu said, leaning forward slightly, his interest genuine. And so, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Manhattan skyline in the exact golden hues Elizabeth Calloway had imagined, Henry opened both the velvet box and the story of a love that had spanned nearly half a century. The restored wedding ring caught the light, sending small rainbows dancing across the white tablecloth, as if Elizabeth herself were present, approving of her husband's unexpected companion. "She was a fourth-grade teacher," Henry said, turning the restored wedding ring in the fading sunlight. "Taught for 37 years in the same school. Kids would come back as adults just to see Mrs. Calloway tell her how she changed their lives." His eyes took on a faraway look. Elizabeth could see something special in everyone, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Keanu listened with genuine attention, ignoring the occasional flash of a phone camera from distant tables. Their whiskey sours had arrived, along with an appetizer the chef had personally prepared, a detail that wasn't lost on Henry, who had noted how quickly the restaurant staff transformed once Keanu acknowledged him. "To Elizabeth," Keanu said, raising his glass, "for seeing the special in everyone." Henry lifted his drink, hand steady despite his age. "To Elizabeth." His voice caught slightly on her name. As they sipped their drinks, Bradley reappeared at the table's edge, visibly uncomfortable, but clearly sent on a mission by the manager. He cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, the chef would like to know if the appetizer is satisfactory and if you're ready to order your main course." The question was ostensibly directed at both men, but Bradley's eyes remained fixed on Keanu, still unable to properly acknowledge Henry. The contrast between the waiter's earlier cruelty and current forced politeness hung in the air like a sour note. Keanu set down his glass and turned to Henry. "What do you think? Is it satisfactory?" Henry looked directly at Bradley for the first time since being rescued from the service table. There was no vindictiveness in his expression, only dignity. "The appetizer is excellent. Please thank the chef." Bradley nodded stiffly, still avoiding eye contact with Henry. "And for the main course?" Keanu's expression shifted subtly, a quiet intensity behind his normally gentle demeanor. "Actually," he said, "I think we might need a moment." Bradley retreated, and as if on cue, the manager appeared again, hovering nearby with the anxious energy of someone trying to avert a PR disaster. The restaurant's other patrons had shifted from open staring to more discreet observation, though the story of what was unfolding had clearly spread through whispers and texts. New arrivals were being briefed by their dining companions, heads turning briefly toward the corner booth before quickly looking away. "Is he bothering you?" Keanu asked quietly once Bradley was out of earshot. "We could request another server." Henry shook his head, running a thumb along the smooth edge of the velvet box. "No need. I've dealt with worse." A slight smile crossed his face. "During Korea, I spent 2 weeks in a foxhole with a sergeant who hated my Boston accent so much he made me write my words before speaking them." Keanu laughed, a genuine sound that carried across the now hushed restaurant. The other diners seemed surprised, not just by the sound, but by the realization that the elderly man and the actor were engaged in actual conversation, not just a celebrity's momentary charity. Elizabeth always said that how people treat the ones they think don't matter. That's the true test of character, Henry continued, his voice gaining strength. She taught her students that every day. The sun had begun its final descent now, the golden light intensifying through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the restaurant. It was exactly the moment Elizabeth had cut out of the magazine, the magical hour when Manhattan became a city of copper and bronze, shadows and light. Henry opened the velvet box fully now, revealing the restored wedding ring. The simple gold band caught the sunset light, seemingly glowing from within. 42 years ago today she put this on my finger, Henry said it was a perfect circle for a perfect promise. The restaurant had fallen into a reverent silence. Even those who had been openly mocking Henry earlier seemed transfixed by the tableau in the corner booth, the elderly man holding a wedding ring in the sunset light, the famous actor listening with undivided attention. Several women at nearby tables were discreetly wiping away tears. Men who had laughed at Henry's expense now looked away, something like shame crossing their features. "When she got sick," Henry continued, "the doctors gave us 3 months. She made it 14. His voice remained steady, though emotion shimmered beneath the surface. "Near the end, she made me promise something. She said, 'Henry, when I'm gone, don't you dare disappear too.'" Keanu nodded, understanding evident in his expression. The loss reflected in his eyes suggested he knew something about grief's territory. "So I come to the places she dreamed of seeing," Henry said. "I bring her with me." He gestured to the ring. "This got damaged last year when my arthritis acted up, dropped it right down the garbage disposal. Took 3 months of my pension to get it restored properly." Bradley had returned with 2 menus, hovering uncertainly at the table's edge. This time it was Keanu who ignored him completely, focused entirely on Henry and the moment unfolding between them. "You know what's strange?" Henry said, looking directly into Keanu's eyes. "All those years teaching kids to stand up for themselves, and Elizabeth never did learn to stand up for herself. Too kind, maybe. Always put others first." Something shifted in Keanu's expression, a quiet resolve forming. He turned suddenly to Bradley, who flinched slightly under the direct attention. "I think," Keanu said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent restaurant, "that we should start this evening over." He gestured toward Henry. "This gentleman has a reservation for a very special occasion, and I believe he deserves the best table in the house and the best service this restaurant can provide. Don't you agree?" Every eye in the restaurant was locked on Bradley, whose face flushed with the realization that he had become the centerpiece of a very public moral lesson. The silence that followed Keanu's words seemed to stretch across the entire restaurant. Bradley stood frozen, career and reputation hanging in the balance as every diner waited for his response. The manager stepped forward, clearly ready to intervene, but Keanu raised a hand slightly, a quiet request for space to let the moment unfold naturally. "Yes, sir," Bradley finally said, voice barely audible. Then, turning to Henry directly for the first time, "Mr. Calloway, please accept my sincere apologies for my behavior earlier. It was unprofessional and unkind." The words came out stiffly at first, but as he continued, something in his expression softened. "Your reservation noted the special occasion. I should have honored that." Henry studied the young man's face for a long moment before nodding once. "Apology accepted, son." The restaurant collectively exhaled. The manager, seeing an opportunity, stepped forward. "Mr. Calloway, Mr. Reeves, if you'd allow us, the chef would like to prepare a special anniversary dinner, on the house, of course." Phones had disappeared now, tucked away as their owners seemed to recognize that what was unfolding wasn't content for social media, but a genuine human moment they had been privileged to witness. Several nearby diners looked down at their plates, a collective shame settling over those who had participated in Henry's humiliation. As the evening progressed, something remarkable happened to the 21 sky. The invisible walls between tables began to dissolve. An elderly couple from across the restaurant stopped by to congratulate Henry on his anniversary, sharing that they were celebrating 47 years themselves. A young woman approached nervously to tell him that her grandmother had been a 4th-grade teacher, too, and his story had moved her to call her that very moment. Keanu remained at the table, deflecting attention from himself whenever possible, directing it back to Henry and his stories. The actor's presence had been the catalyst, but it was Henry's dignity and love that transformed the evening. The restored wedding ring remained on the table between them, occasionally catching the light as the sun completed its journey beyond the horizon, the city lights now taking over with their own magic. Bradley, assigned to remain their server as his own lesson in growth, returned with attentive service that grew increasingly genuine. By the time he brought their dessert, a special creation the chef had made inspired by the 1970s when Henry and Elizabeth had married, the young man's arrogance had been replaced by something resembling respect. "My grandmother would have been about your age," he admitted quietly while serving coffee. "I don't visit her enough." As the evening drew to a close, Henry carefully returned the wedding ring to its velvet box. "She would have loved this," he said, looking out at the nighttime cityscape, "not because of the fancy food or the view, but because of the people. Elizabeth always said a meal shared with the right person in a cardboard box was better than a feast with the wrong people in a palace. Keanu smiled. Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman. The wisest, Henry agreed, and she would have spotted you for a good soul right away. She never needed a magazine to tell her who was worth knowing. When they finally stood to leave, something unprecedented happened. The entire restaurant rose in unison, a standing ovation, not for the Hollywood star, but for the elderly man in the dated suit who had taught them all something about love and dignity. Many eyes were damp, including Bradley's. Outside, as the valet brought around Keanu's car, the actor pressed something into Henry's hand, a card with his personal contact information. Next year, Keanu said, for 43. You tell me where she always wanted to go, and we'll go there. Then, with a genuine smile, no one should celebrate an anniversary alone when there are friends to be had. As Henry Calloway made his way home that night, Elizabeth's restored ring secure in his pocket, he knew he had kept his promise to her in more ways than one. He hadn't disappeared, and somehow, in her absence, she was still teaching people to see the special in everyone, even in an old man dining alone.